Imagine this. You're standing in central Paris. The Eiffel Tower glows gold against the night sky. Cafes are full. Luxury brands line the Champs-Élysées. Tourists spend €100 on dinner without blinking. The country has nuclear weapons, a permanent UN security seat, and the world's 7th largest economy. By every visible metric, France looks rich. But now, imagine you're not a tourist. You're a 28-year-old French graduate earning €2,100 per month before taxes. Nearly half disappears into payroll deductions and income tax. Rent for a small apartment in Lyon costs €900. Gasoline is €1.90 per liter. Public debt sits at over €3 trillion. The government runs chronic deficits. Youth unemployment hovers near double digits. Productivity growth has stalled. And here's the paradox. How can a country with world-class companies like LVMH, Airbus, Total Energies, and Sanofi feel economically fragile? Why does France's GDP per capita lag behind countries like the United States and even parts of Northern Europe? And why, despite its wealth, does the French state constantly seem to be on the brink of a fiscal crisis? What if the France you think you know, glamorous, stable, wealthy, is actually living on borrowed time? Today, we're going to break down the numbers, the history, the decisions, and the uncomfortable truth behind modern France. Because the story of France isn't about poverty in the traditional sense. It's about structural weakness hiding behind a luxury facade. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Let's rewind. After World War II, France rebuilt itself through what historians call les Trente Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years, from 1945 to 1975. GDP growth averaged over 5% annually. Industrial output surged. Living standards doubled. The French state built infrastructure, railways, nuclear plants, highways, and social protections. It worked. By the 1980s, France was firmly among the world's richest nations. Strong unions, a powerful welfare state, a 35-hour workweek, generous pensions, universal health care, subsidized education. The French model became a global symbol of social capitalism. But here's what most people missed. The warning signs started quietly in the 1990s. Productivity growth slowed. Unemployment rose above 10%. Government spending crept higher. And after adopting the euro in 1999, France gave up control of its monetary policy. At first, it didn't seem like a problem. Cheap borrowing masked the structural cracks. But here's where it gets interesting. Let's start with the headline number. France's GDP in 2023, roughly $3 trillion. Sounds impressive, but GDP alone is misleading. Let's do the math. France has about 68 million people. That puts GDP per capita around $44,000 to $46,000, depending on exchange rates. Now compare that. United States, over $80,000 per capita. Germany, around $52,000. The Netherlands, over $60,000. Switzerland, over $90,000. France isn't poor, but it's not elite rich either. And here's the kicker. Median disposable income after taxes and transfers is significantly lower than the U.S., while taxes are dramatically higher. The OECD consistently ranks France among the highest taxed economies in the developed world. Total tax burden? Roughly 45 to 47% of GDP. That's nearly half the economy. Now, imagine running a household where half your income goes to the state before you even make decisions. Yes, you get health care and pensions, but growth suffers, investment slows, entrepreneurship shrinks, and that's exactly what happened. From 2000 to 2020, French real GDP growth averaged roughly 1.4% annually. The U.S. averaged closer to 2%. Over 20 years, that gap compounds massively. Compound growth is brutal. If you grow at 2% instead of 1.4%, your economy ends up about 12 to 15% larger over 2 decades. That's trillions in lost output. And this is just the beginning. The welfare state squeeze. France spends more on social benefits than almost any country on earth. Public spending is roughly 57% of GDP, among the highest in the OECD. Let that sink in. More than half of all economic activity flows through the government. Pensions alone consume around 14% of GDP. Healthcare spending, roughly 12%. Unemployment insurance, housing benefits, family allowances, the list goes on. Now, before you think this is an ideological argument, pause. France is one of the lowest elderly poverty rates in Europe. Its healthcare system ranks highly in access and quality. The bull case says, this is social stability. This is civilized capitalism. But the bear case? Demographics. France's fertility rate has fallen below replacement level, around 1.8 for years, recently closer to 1.7, and trending downward. Fewer workers, more retirees. That's an economic boa constrictor slowly tightening. In 2000, there were roughly 2.1 workers per retiree. By 2023, closer to 1.7, and that ratio keeps shrinking. So what happens when fewer workers support more pensioners? Taxes rise, or debt explodes. France chose debt. Which brings us to the next problem, the 3 trillion problem. As of 2024, France's public debt exceeds 3 trillion euros. That's around 110 to 115% of GDP. In 1980, it was under 20%. Let's repeat that. From under 20% of GDP to over 110% in 4 decades. That's not gradual drift, that's structural dependence. Interest rates stayed low for years thanks to the European Central Bank. It felt painless. But then 2022 happened. Inflation surged above 6%. The ECB raised rates aggressively. Suddenly, servicing that $3 trillion debt became expensive. Every 1% increase in borrowing costs adds tens of billions in annual interest payments. Imagine paying $40 to $50 billion per year just in interest. That's more than France's entire defense budget in some years. And here's the trap. France cannot devalue its currency to inflate away debt. It uses the euro. It cannot easily slash spending without riots. We saw that during pension reform protests in 2023 when President Emmanuel Macron raised the retirement age from 62 to 64. Millions marched. Refineries shut down. Garbage piled in Paris streets. So fiscal reform becomes politically radioactive. This is where it gets crazy, so stay with me, because debt alone isn't the full story. Productivity is the ultimate wealth generator. Output per hour worked. France actually performs well per hour, comparable to Germany. But French workers work fewer total hours per year than Americans or Germans. Shorter work weeks, longer vacations, earlier retirement, until recently. Again, lifestyle choice? Absolutely. But here's the economic math. Fewer hours times stagnant growth equals slower overall output expansion. Meanwhile, innovation leadership shifted. In 2000, Europe had serious tech ambitions. Today, the top 10 global tech companies by market cap, mostly American and Chinese. France has luxury giants, LVMH, Kering, and industrial champions like Airbus. But where is the French equivalent of Apple, Amazon, Nvidia? Venture capital investment per capita in France remains far below the U.S. Risk appetite matters, and heavy regulation can discourage experimentation. Quick pause. If you're realizing how subtle structural decline can be, hit subscribe, because most countries don't collapse dramatically. They stagnate quietly, and stagnation is harder to detect.
The deindustrialization dilemma. In 1980, manufacturing represented roughly 20% of French GDP. Today, around 10%. Factories closed. Production shifted to Eastern Europe and Asia. Trade deficits widened. In 2022, France ran a record trade deficit of over 160 billion euros, driven largely by energy imports after the Ukraine war. Germany exports high-value machinery globally. France imports more than it exports. Trade deficits aren't automatically catastrophic, but persistent deficits weaken industrial sovereignty. Remember that phrase. Energy dependence, semiconductor shortages, supply chain disruptions. These exposed vulnerabilities. France relies heavily on nuclear energy, around 70% of electricity, which is a strength, but aging reactors required maintenance shutdowns in 2022, forcing electricity imports. Energy independence? Not as secure as advertised, and this feeds into the broader picture.
The youth squeeze. Youth unemployment in France has hovered between 15 and 20% for years. That's double or triple U.S. levels. Why? Rigid labor laws, high payroll taxes. Employers hesitate to hire because firing is difficult and expensive, so companies use temporary contracts. Young workers bounce between short-term jobs, delayed wealth accumulation, delayed home ownership, delayed family formation. And here's the feedback loop. Lower fertility, fewer future workers, higher tax burden per worker. Economic pressure intensifies. You see how this becomes self-reinforcing. France isn't collapsing, it's compressing, like a spring under pressure.
The luxury mask. Here's the part most outsiders miss. France's global image is dominated by luxury. LVMH alone generates over 80 billion euros in annual revenue. Hermès handbags cost $10,000. Paris Fashion Week drives billions in brand value. But luxury exports mask domestic weakness. High-end brands serve global elites. They don't reflect median French reality. It's like judging the health of the American economy solely by looking at Silicon Valley billionaires. The stock market can soar, while household purchasing power stagnates. France's household savings rate is high, around 17 to 18%. Partly because people feel uncertain about the future. Confidence matters in economics, and confidence has cracks.
The breaking point. 2023. Pension revolt. It's January 2023. President Macron announces pension reform. Retirement age from 62 to 64. On paper, modest. In practice, explosive. France's pension deficit was projected to widen significantly in coming decades. Without reform, annual shortfalls could reach tens of billions. The government pushed reform using Constitutional Article 49.3, bypassing a full parliamentary vote. Protests erupted. Over 1 million people marched nationwide on multiple occasions. Transport halted, schools closed, oil refineries blocked. Credit rating agencies noticed. In April 2023, Fitch downgraded France's credit rating from AA to AA-. Reason? Political gridlock and rising debt. That downgrade increases borrowing costs, which worsens deficits, which fuels more anger. This wasn't Greece 2010, but it was a warning shot. Who won? Short-term, retirees preserved benefits for now. Who lost? Future taxpayers. And bond investors began demanding higher yields. This is how advanced economies weaken. Not through dramatic collapse, but through slow fiscal erosion.
Now, before you sit back and laugh and say, that's just France being France, pause. This pattern isn't unique. Italy's debt exceeds 140% of GDP. Japan's exceeds 250%. The United States, over 120%. This is the canary in the coal mine. Aging populations, expanding welfare states, slowing growth. Political paralysis. France just happens to be a clean case study because its social model is so generous and so visible. If growth doesn't accelerate through innovation, immigration, or structural reform, the math eventually forces hard choices, higher taxes, lower benefits, or inflation. There's no fourth option, and the longer reforms are delayed, the more painful they become.
So what does this teach us? First, wealth isn't just GDP size. It's growth, demographics, productivity, and flexibility. Second, generosity without growth becomes fragile. A welfare state needs a dynamic economy underneath it, or it starts cannibalizing itself. Third, the hidden pattern most people miss is compounding. Small growth differences over decades create massive wealth gaps. Why does this matter to you? Because every developed country faces similar demographic and fiscal pressures. France isn't poor in absolute terms, but compared to its own potential and its global competitors, it's economically constrained, and constraints shape power.
So next time you see Paris glowing in the night and assume everything is fine, remember this. Behind the beauty is a balance sheet. Behind the luxury storefronts is a $3 trillion debt tab. The real question isn't whether France is poor, it's whether it can avoid becoming poorer relative to the world around it. What do you think? Is France's model sustainable, or is it living on borrowed time? Let me know in the comments. And in the next video, we'll break down another economic paradox hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes the richest-looking countries carry the heaviest invisible burdens. Stay curious, subscribe,